Three, two, one, action.
Well, let me tell you something, brother.
Because the best in the world is back, and the best in the world is standing in the middle of the ring, live and in living color in Nashville, Tennessee, on a Monday night, and his name is...
Obviously, I'm here to talk to you today. We're going to go back in history a little bit. It's talking CM Punk and you filming that documentary series that you did. Because one of the things I will say is I've always kind of actually wanted to talk to you about this because I thought it was such a great series. But I feel like it's one of those things that's often forgotten because it's just for a specific point in time, just for that one fight. And it's one of those things that can almost be dismissed. But like I feel like that can be a bit unfair to you guys because like even though it was just for that singular moment in a way, doesn't take away from how great the series was. Do you ever have that feeling?
Yes. I mean, a lot of those things that like kind of lead up to a fight, you know, if you think about like, they used to do those 24/7 shows on HBO that I thought were like excellent about like an upcoming boxing match. And, you know, once it's over, it's kind of just in the periphery. So, you know, so much about the CM Punk series was the lead up to his fight. And like we filmed that show for like over a year and a half because his fight kept getting delayed. And, you know, we took different twists and turns. But then once the fight happens, you know, it's almost like the series can become dated at that point, a little anticlimactic because you know what the result's going to be for the fight and whatnot. But it did, you know, it got thrown on Fox Sports, I think, Fox Sports Net, and it aired it opposite Monday Night Raw, like which I just didn't understand that mentality of for programming. It aired opposite Raw. So it's just like I didn't understand that. But on YouTube, the UFC had put it up.
Yeah, that's where I watched it. I watched it on YouTube when they were putting up.
And this is the version that they re-uploaded it. So like it had uploaded on there and like each episode had done like a couple of million views. And it was up there for like a few months or something, 2 months. And then they took it down and then they re-uploaded it like 8 months or a year later. And people watched it again. And now I don't know if it's still up there, but the episodes have each still over 1 million views. So a lot of people viewed it on online.
It is still up there, by the way, because I rewatched them just a few days ago, just like before this. So I just want to refresh my memory, and it still holds up. I mean, like it even just like it doesn't change the fact that it's happened and been and gone. It's still amazing, and I was still like engrossed. Like it's just really well done, and you like also.
Thank you. I was just gonna say, I think, you know, it gives you a lot of insight into like Phil Brooks and his mindset and like how he views like the world and you know, so I think if you're, you know, he's so relevant again that if you want to get some insight into who he is as a person and also too, like we got a lot of footage of him and his wife together, which up to that point, I don't think there had been much done that I'm aware of on the two of them together or since, you know. So he was pretty open, like he was in a good place then. So I tried to take advantage of that, and I would push him to film more at his house and with his wife.
No, I will say that because watching back, I was like, I think this is the best. It's the best indication of who he is as a person. Like it shows him in the best light possible. I think like it really gives the true insight to him, because I think when that All Out stuff happened, the whole big melee with that, I think I remember you tweeted as well, like kind of in support of him, almost being like the guy I knew, the guy I filmed with, like it's not what you think, like what you're seeing here, or like am I correct? Am I remember that correctly?
I mean, I don't remember what I tweeted, but I think that, you know, he was in a very different mindset. So he was sort of the fish out of water in MMA. So he really wanted to I think, put his best foot forward, and he, you know, you never heard a bad thing ever said about him from anyone at the MMA gym that he trained at. In fact, everybody really liked him, you know, just very humble, put his nose down. And I mean, to my knowledge, at least up until like a year ago, he was still training at Rupertsport. He was still there training. So, you know, he was, I don't know, maybe it's just seems to be like wrestling seems to be the one area, because he's done acting too. You never have heard about any issues with him, like on a movie set or on a TV show. It just seems to be that the world of wrestling is where there's conflict.
Yeah, that's actually a fair point. And you said about like showing like kind of human side of him and with his wife and stuff. And I think that's what makes it so different and so good as well. Like we have so much focus on that. Did you make a conscious effort to really show him? Because I think the great documentaries always do that, and your films definitely do, especially if, you know, go back to look at the Ric Flair one and things like that. You really show the person, like, and you give like this open perspective of who they are. And did you make a conscious effort to do that? Because especially like, because at the time, especially in the MMA community, he was being hammered a lot. Like, did you kind of want to show that, like, hey, this is who this guy is, and maybe give him some respect, if you will?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he was very open at the time, like to doing stuff, like especially when we first started. As you go on with any project, you know, they start to get tired of you after a while, but he was willing, you know, and we're, you know, you have to make 4 episodes of content. And so you're looking for little things of what we can do. And, you know, the gym gets really boring after a while. It's like, you know, if you're doing a football show, it's just practice after practice, and it just gets repetitive. Like, you know, we get it. He's learning how to strike, you know, so there would be different things that, you know, I would ask, like, hey, can we film this, or can we film that? Like, he's doing a comic book signing, or, you know, I asked what he was doing for Christmas, just to kind of get how he was. He moved to Milwaukee, got an apartment. I said, can we film that? So any time, I would just try to keep in touch with him. And then, you know, from a budget perspective, you know, we kind of were budgeted to shoot this. Like, originally he was going to train for like maybe 8 months or 9 months, and then he got hurt, and then his fight got delayed. So we started shooting the show in February, I think, of 2015, and he fought in September of 2016.
Yeah.
So we were shooting for like a year and a half. And, you know, another thing kind of interesting about the show, there's no narration and there's no talking head interviews in the show. I really wanted it to be just like his perspective, and the interview all takes place when he's driving to the gym from Chicago. We would do these car rides with him, and he was really open during it. He never said we couldn't talk about things. And, you know, like, I was stoked to do this show because I was like a fan of his, and I thought this was like a great opportunity to kind of show, you know, this transformation from a wrestler to a fighter. And I respected him a lot for doing this. You know, like, you know, one thing you could say about him is, like, he's never afraid to risk failure. I've noticed he's always trying different things, and I admire that.
Yeah, no, and it absolutely does show that journey as well, that transition, like, excellently. And you talked about like how long you spent filming with him. I think even initially when I watched it, I didn't really register that, like, how long it was. But when watching it back, like a few days back, I was like, oh wow, this was like a really long stretch of time. Like, what is that like as a filmmaker? Because even doing certain documentaries, like, let's say, for example, like the Ric Flair one and stuff, I don't imagine you were filming that long, like a year and a half with someone.
Well, it's very different. Like the Ric Flair one, you're looking back at something.
Yeah.
Like Ric Flair's life, it all happened.
Yeah.
To what we're talking about. So you're really going and shooting a lot of interviews and looking for archives. We didn't know what was happening with CM Punk. So you really have to work in conjunction with your subject of like, hey, like, what are you doing? And this is where kind of art meets commerce, because you have to, you can't shoot everything, you have to shoot the right things. And I've
Yes.
seen different producers and filmmakers get into trouble because they just go out of the gate and they're like, we have to be everywhere, we have to shoot everything, and then they run out of money, and they also annoy the subject, because they're just like up their ass the whole time, and it just gets irritating. And one thing with CM Punk, I tried to be very respectful of his time. So like, I had asked if we could be there for Christmas Eve, and I said we would be there for like 40 minutes. And I meant it. Like, we'd go in, we'd shoot, and then we'd leave. And so I never tried to overstay my welcome. And there would just be different things I would just try to keep in touch with him about. And then, you know, it becomes difficult. Like the first year that we were filming, he was all about it. Then when he hurt his shoulder and he was getting frustrated, you know, I wouldn't always hear from him, or I'd text him, he wouldn't text me back. And I'd find out he went somewhere, and I was like, oh, dude, that would be really good for us to film. You know, I just need a heads up, because he's in Chicago, I'm in Charlotte.
Yeah.
So I'm not like right around the corner from him. And but he was pretty good, you know, with that. You know, he was pretty good. I mean, as the fight got closer, and I've seen this with other fighters too, they do want you kind of back more. And we actually had in the last episode, we wanted to build to something, because see, that's the other thing. We didn't film his fight. So his fights that he had in the UFC wasn't in the show. So in the last episode, we were trying to fill content. So like, we filmed his opponent and showed him a little bit. Then we also set up like the equivalent of like a scrimmage, almost like a sparring session, where we brought in an opponent and filmed it, and, you know, and set that up with multiple cameras. And we didn't know how he would do. And he won that fight, you know, and did well, and was excited about it. And I remember telling him we needed to film like a big close, like with him working out and his opponent working out, like kind of like Rocky, you know, Rocky-esque, like Rocky 4. And he was kind of like done at that point. He's like, dude, how much more do you need to film? And I go, this is the last, like, we're going to come to your apartment, and I want to set up a couple of things that I'm going to tell you to do. So I would be like, go on the bike for a little bit, and lift this, look in the mirror. And he did it. He did all that stuff, you know, sometimes begrudgingly, but he did it. And then here's a little funny story. You know, we used Cult of Personality in the last episode, the song, and I licensed it. And when I sent it to the UFC, someone there, like an executive, was like, why are you using this song? It doesn't fit. I'm like, that's his theme song, dude. I mean, the wrestling fan, like, they didn't really know that much about his wrestling career, you know. And I was like, no, this is going to be his like walkout music, because I said, this is his song. So I said, the wrestling fans are going to watch this and pop big when they hear this music come in. They're going to be like, oh, this is cool. So luckily they trusted me, and the UFC is great with that. Like, I loved working with him, and still do. They give you a lot of freedom, you know. So it was a pleasant experience.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was going to ask about the cult personality, because you say the wrestling fans would pop big. I mean, I'm probably a perfect example of that. When that hit, I was, but I know, and it actually, as a fan, it got me like really pumped for the fight, and I was like, oh, now I can't wait. Like, it worked. It did what you wanted it to do. And I think because of the music, obviously, you know, knowing the background, it just added that much more. Was that always a thing in the back of your mind? You're like, I'm going to use it for the conclusion. That's when cult personality was going to come.
Yes,
because I was wondering, I was like, oh, could it, like, oh, was he going to use it for like the intro of each episode?
He set up some other songs that he liked, like, you know, he likes certain punk bands, and we put one of them in the first episode. We did this big thing of him running through Chicago that we set up, and we filmed it with a drone. And it ends the first episode, and like we had a drum like one of those barrels, and we lit it on fire, and he runs past it, and we set up all these things. And I just knew that the time to get stuff where you're like telling whether it's an actor or an athlete to do things is usually, it's better trying to do it early on in the process than later, you know, because early on, like, you know, they want to be pleasing and show their good sport. So he was like, he ran through the snow and he did all the stuff. And, you know, I think he wanted to do, he was appreciative of the fight and the UFC signing him, and he wanted to do good for the UFC and show that he was a team player. So he set that up, and we had some of his friends' band's music in the show. And we filmed with Lars Fredrickson from Rancid.
Yeah.
I can't remember if we used a Rancid song in the series, but
I can't recall. I think when it comes to music, just the cult personality, obviously for bias reasons, just sticks out when you think of the episode series. You mentioned earlier, like you said, you didn't know how he was going to do, right? I mean, I guess no one knew. That was the unknown, and that was the whole thing, the fascination with this whole kind of journey. Was there ever trepidation from you or Punk or even UFC, like going into it to be like, we're doing this, but we literally have no idea how this is going to come out. Like, you could film it and he could be absolutely awful and never get any better and ever ready to fight. Like, because literally no one knew, right?
Yeah. Not from the UFC. I mean, I think that was part of the draw and the experiment. And they were, I mean, they would say, how's he look? But never, they're very good that way. Like, they don't try to set things up, or like, this was not a reality show. This was a docu-series. Like, nothing was staged, and, you know, we just, you know, the story unfolded, and that's what we documented. You know, the thing to remember about CM Punk is he was not like an athlete when he was younger. This isn't like Brock Lesnar. You know, Brock Lesnar was an incredible collegiate wrestler and a natural athlete. I mean, he tried out for the Minnesota Vikings and almost made the team. And I don't even think he played football in high school. Brock Lesnar's the kind of guy that could never have played tennis, and you hand him a tennis racket and he'd be really good at it. He's a natural
physical freak.
That's not CM Punk at all. He's not that athletic, actually, compared to other wrestlers. You know, he doesn't do flips and go flying around, and he's incredibly tough and gritty, but he's not that natural athlete, like from a high school wrestling background that he had and whatnot. So I think he didn't have the skill, you know, he had the will, which kind of reminded me of me, because I have zero skill and I had a fight, and it was just like all will, you know, like I had terrible head movement, got punched in the face all the time, but just kept moving forward. You know, but once you get to the UFC, and that's another thing, he had never had a fight or even an amateur fight. So I think if it were being, you know, if it was anyone else, he would have had an amateur fight with someone who had a record a little more similar to him. The guy that he fought had more fights, amateur fights, and was a real athletic guy too. So and you know, also too, he started training like in his mid-30s or late 30s or something, whatever. He wasn't young, and had a lot of wear and tear from wrestling, you know. So, you know, I admire him a lot for that. But I think like if he had had an amateur fight, he could have definitely won. But once you get to the UFC, you know, everyone's good in the UFC. Everybody, like, there's no sort of like tomato cans there. I mean, you know, including the guy he fought went on and has fought other guys and won. On fights and stuff, and I think it's still in the UFC. So that shows you that he was fighting a legitimate guy.
When, like, in watching, like in documenting like the training, like, was there ever a point where you were like maybe a bit like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go, or like is he going to get better, or like because obviously not in a negative way, but obviously so it's just I guess it could be a natural thought through that journey.
Well, it's hard to tell in the gym, you know. In the gym we did sparring, and he had a long way to go. Like, it wasn't like he was a natural at all, that we saw, but you know, his work ethic is incredible. He's got a great work ethic, and I think that's evident. But he sparred someone and the guy handled him pretty easily. But the guy had been training, like, since he was like for like 15, 20 years. So he was really behind the eight ball. If it was like, if you think about other wrestlers who have done, like Batista did MMA, and had a fight. But like, look how big Batista is. And then he fought a guy, I think that, maybe was a little more on that level and had one fight. So again, I just think that once you get to the UFC, it's just so hard. You've seen it where they brought in a couple of guys and they've had, like they brought in a couple of boxers and those guys didn't do well. It's
like
so
James
good
Toney.
Yeah, these guys are so good and so highly skilled that, and look, he could probably kick on the street like 90% of the population's ass. That's just from the training that he's gotten over, since doing the show. He's trained with like the highest level MMA fighters,
I did actually say, oh, sorry, no, I was just going to say, I did actually say to someone, when he obviously had his altercation backstage, which led to his departure from AEW, I was like, I don't think people understand, like, yes, he didn't do great in UFC, but he's now a legit trained fighter. So the common man,
and those guys, not that many, wrestlers are incredibly tough, but how many of them, he's put thousands of hours in at the gym. He has belts in jiu-jitsu. He can choke you out. He knows how to throw a punch, so he might not have like great head movement or footwork, but like in a street fight, he can handle himself, guaranteed. Guaranteed he can. So, and also he's shown that he's not afraid. He's tough. That's something that you can't teach. Are you willing to sit there and get hit in the face? And there's, two reactions when people get punched in the face. They either go like this, like they recoil, or they move forward. And I think you either have that in you or you don't. And he showed that he has it in him, that, he didn't quit.
Yeah. And we said it earlier, one thing that is undeniable, that is he's always the talk of the town. Like, it's pretty nuts. Like, wherever he goes, wrestling, UFC, whatever, he's the subject. He's the talk of the town. Like, everyone's buzzing about CM Punk in one way or another. And because obviously in his debut, Stipe Miocic was fighting, Alistair Overeem was on the card, Uriah Faber was on the card, and arguably it was all primarily still centered around Punk. Like, he was the biggest attraction in a way. So your series was almost like arguably like the biggest promotional piece going into that pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Did you realize that at the time when you were doing it, that this is probably going to be like the big central piece of like pushing this pay-per-view in a way, like going into it?
I mean, the fact that you're doing a whole series about I knew it was big. So like how this came about, it was actually the first project that I had ever done with the UFC, even before the Looking for a Fight series.
Oh, okay.
I was doing a series called Snoop and Son, about Snoop Dogg's son played at Bishop Gorman High School, played football there. And we were doing a series for that. And Snoop's son was friends with Nico Fertitta, Lorenzo Fertitta's son, and was going to a fight. I may have pushed Cordell to go to the fight because I wanted to go to the fight. And it was the first Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier fight, the very first one. And we went there and filmed. And it was a little, this was in 2014. So it was a little different time of the UFC. And I had been trying to film with him for a long time and kind of get my foot in the door. I had sent my resume and I just couldn't crack that nut. And then suddenly we, are filming on the floor of the UFC, and I'm waiting to film. I saw another producer that I knew who had done the UFC, and he knew I was trying to get in, and he asked me what I was doing there. And I was like, yeah, I think, we're going to film with Cordell and then Lorenzo's son, and we're supposed to go here and we're supposed to go there. And he was kind of like, oh yeah, you're not going to go there. Like there's no way, because blah, blah, blah. And then like right on cue, this person comes and says, hey, Mr. Fertitta is ready to have you come back now. Come on back. I'm like, see ya. So we go back there, and they just were so welcoming to us. And Nico Fertitta, Lorenzo's son, was a great football player. and we mic'd him up during a game, and I gave that footage to Lorenzo. So now I had like a little relationship with him, and we were talking, and I got to meet Craig Borsari backstage, and Dana. And so we're chatting it up. And I said, I'd love to do work for you guys. And Craig's like, oh, we'd love to have you. So he gave me his email, his number. So then the night it's announced, it was, I think, announced on a pay-per-view that CM Punk was going to fight. It was like in January. As soon as it came out, I emailed Craig and I said, hey, are you doing a series about this? Because I'd love to do it. And he goes, that would be great. Let's talk on Monday. So we talked, and that got the ball rolling. So like I just jumped on it, and then like a month later we were filming the show. So it's pretty wild.
Was that in their head already, or did you kind of put that idea in their head?
I don't know. I mean, it came together, I think. I don't know if they had visioned doing a series. I think I might have said, hey, let's do a doc on this. And then he came back and said, well, what do you think about a series? And it kind of went back and forth. In fact, the production company that does The Ultimate Fighter, they wanted originally like, hey, would you work for them? And I go, no, I want you use my production company. I want to run the show. And I kind of like said I'd really like to. And again, to UFC's credit, they allowed me to do that. So like I remember we did my ex-wife was in the hospital. She had a kidney infection, and she was literally in the hospital room. And I was doing a conference call with CM Punk and the UFC about the show. While she was in, I remember that pretty vividly. And I remember they were trying to tell Punk like some of the things I had done, like, oh, Rory's done a couple 30 for 30s, and they mentioned that. And he actually said he had seen this thing I did called Silver Reunion, which is a reunion of the Olympic basketball team. So from 1972, it was like a short film. And he said he had seen it. So I just remember doing that conference call. Like when you get an opportunity, when like the timing's right, you got to jump on it. You can't like hem it on, wait. And like with the UFC, like that Conor fight was a few months. Snoop and Son had just debuted. I was like, this is the time for me to kind of push myself to do a show with them. And it was cool.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great metaphor for life as well, isn't it? You've got to take action. Like sometimes you can't necessarily plan it so strategically. You just got to go for it.
Well, and I was a huge wrestling fan too, huge, like growing up and everything. But I didn't know like how much I should be telling that to him, because he was kind of down on wrestling at that point, and just wasn't all about it. But as we got to know each other, I could bring up things like my favorite wrestler growing up was Rowdy Piper. And he really liked Rowdy Piper. So he would tell me stories about him. They got along really well. Also, I love the Macho Man Randy Savage. Punk loves Macho Man Randy Savage. So we could talk about some of that old school wrestling. And then, I would ask him questions like, why did they do this? Or why about him? And he would tell me. And, I really only have good things to say about my experience with him.
Yeah.
Granted, I'm not in wrestling and stuff. So, but in my experience, he was very polite and respectful, always respectful to the crew too. Like when we'd be in his house, he'd shake everyone's hand. He'd ask people what their name was, offer everyone water. I mean, these are little things. Like I've been in other people's house and they're not very welcoming. They're like, when are you going to leave? They don't acknowledge the crew. They don't offer you a drink. He always did that. He's very polite. Actually. And even before his fight, I wished him luck and everything. And he never watched the series. He didn't want to watch it. So, but he sent me like a text, and he was like, something like, I know I can be a pain in the ass sometimes. Thanks for putting up with me. And I appreciate it. Again, didn't have to do that.
That's great. I mean, is there yeah, that's great to hear. And you do, I think you always get those two sides. He seems like one of those guys where it's like, obviously he can flip. So if in his eyes you rubbed him the wrong way, it's quite like you get a different side
I
of him.
think, I think, I think, yeah, when he's done with you, he can be done with you for a while. Like if
Yeah.
you upset him or cross him, he is, you know, loyalty is really big for him. You know, it's another thing, like a lot of his friends, like we went to a firehouse, I think in one of the episodes, like the people he's friends with, he's been friends with for a pretty long time outside of wrestling, like
Yeah.
people he knew in like high school. Like he's maintained those ties with people. You know, the one guy we visited that knew him was like a firefighter. Another person was like an artist or something, and these are his friends. I think we filmed with his sister too, with the family he grew up in. Like he was very close with his sisters. And you know, another thing that doesn't really get talked about and is that he's been married for a while now. You
Yeah.
know, it seems like he's got a nice marriage. So yes, but it seems also that he has a very firm line that once you cross it, he can be done.
Yeah.
But look, he mend fences with WWE, so anything's possible.
That was going to be what I was going to lead on to. Like having had those experiences that you had with him, like in terms of, because he was very fresh off leaving WWE. It was like, say, a year, like when you met him and like
it
you
was about
started
a
filming.
year or two, somewhere in
So,
there.
which is still pretty fresh. And like he was real, like he was, at least from fan perspective and what we would see and hear, very negative on the wrestling as a whole, he seemed. So knowing that and kind of knowing him, did it shock you that he's actually now back all these years later?
Yeah, it did. It did surprise me, you know. But I mean, in wrestling, I guess never say never. I mean, I never thought Bret Hart would go back to
Yeah.
WWE, but you know, he wasn't. He was just kind of like when we were filming, wrestling wasn't even in his mind. Like to me, that was like completely in the rear view. So something had changed. And you look, as you get older, you mature, you change, and but still, yeah, it was surprising. But look, the WME owns UFC and WWE now, so there's new ownership, and I got to know Triple H a little bit working on the Ric Flair
Yeah.
documentary, and that guy was awesome. And that's just my little slice that I worked with. Like he sat and watched the rough cut. He actually saw the cut of the film before Ric Flair did. He was the first person to see it. And he was so supportive and so cool. And he sent me like a text. I wish I still had it on the night it premiered. And he seems like what I gathered from him, you know, like kind of the perfect person to be running things because he's a wrestler. So he knows what it's like to be a wrestler and everything. But he seems to be very pragmatic, like in his approach with things, like very like wants to get along with people, cooperative, just really has that business side of him like down. But like you think about like supposedly he's the one that got Bruno Sammartino to come back and Ultimate Warrior. He had stuff to do. So he seems to be like a real olive branch guy, like extending the olive branch, you know. When we were there, he was talking about like Hulk Hogan, and at the time when we were discussing it, he wasn't back in WWE yet, and he still had he had that controversy, you know, with the Gawker tape or whatever, and because I think we got on the topic because Hulk Hogan being in the Ric Flair documentary was one of the first interviews he had done in like years at the time. So we were talking about it, and I said, you know, he kind of was like laying out a plan of how he should come back into WWE, you know, and the way he was explaining it was just very like, no pun intended, very cerebral. I know he's a cerebral assassin, but he just really, really struck me as a very intelligent guy. So I would think if anybody would get him back in the fold, it would be Triple H. And then also apparently CM Punk knew Nick Khan he seems to be somebody new there, fresh leadership. So, things have changed. It's a shame it didn't work out with AEW,
Yeah.
because I remember watching him coming out for AEW that first time, and that was surreal too. He's had 2 appearances coming back to wrestling that were like mind-boggling. Just walking out. Like, how many people are just walking out? He didn't do anything. Like, he didn't wrestle. I remember watching it with my wife, and I was cheering when he came out and the music hit and the fans were going nuts. Like, I myself was like off, out of my chair cheering. And I texted Craig Borsari at the UFC, and I was like, "Did you see this?" And he texted me back, "This incredible."
Was this referencing the AEW debut?
AEW, this was AEW.
Yeah.
And then WWE, I had gone to sleep, so I missed him coming out for the Survivor Series. And then the next day, I thought, did this really happen? And because
that one, they did it so strategically as well, because they flashed the logo like the show was ending.
They did both of those so well. Like, when he came out for AEW, it was the very first episode of the new show they were doing, and it was rumored he was going to be there, but it wasn't like necessarily a guarantee. And it was sort of those, I'll believe it when I see it. And when he came out in Chicago and the fans were going wild, it really felt like a fresh start. This one was just pure shock. It was so, I love wrestling, but I do feel like, in a way, the internet has like ruined an aspect of it, which is like the surprise of it.
Yeah.
The surprise, like, that's the joy. Like, I remember as a kid when, somebody new would cross over from WCW to WWF and then vice versa. That was the joy. And then, so they played it so cool, like the way it came out, like it couldn't have been better. But and then you look the next day and you see Seth Rollins like freaking out and giving him the finger. But then, like, I have to like get off. I got off Twitter. It was so annoying because it's like, oh, like, this is all set up and Seth Rollins. It's like, I don't want to hear this. Like, like, why are you, the whole point is like, I love the illusion of not knowing what's real and what's not. That's what CM Punk was so good at and so talented, is he just blurred that line constantly of what's real, what's not. And I think like that's part of the joy of being a wrestling fan. It's like hard to describe, do you agree?
No, 100%. Like, I wish we had, sometimes I wish social media didn't exist, because I'm like, you just pop it up and without even trying, things will just flash up and you see 10 million different things that you don't want to know. And because every time something happens, I'm always telling my friends and stuff like, don't go on your phone.
It's a shame, because I think AEW, they missed out on like what could have been such a good opportunity when he came back.
Yeah.
If they could have just all done business together, that would have blown. They could have, because the timing of it, he came back and delivered another incredible promo. He's got to be top 3 promos of like ever in wrestling. I think he's one of the greatest talkers ever.
Easy.
Because he always delivers different promos, and his promo when he came back was so good. One Bill Phil, and he said the counterfeit box line, and it's just like he just knows what to do, and it's just like they could have just you're just imagine it all in. That was the name of the pay-per-view. Imagine if he wrestled Kenny Omega or the Young Bucks at that. I mean, that would have done monster numbers, and people would watch just to see if like, they really were punching each other, and it would have been wild, so
him and Kenny would have been, I know it would have been another level business, but I mean, there's opportunities now in WWE, hopefully, for some really cool stuff, which, I mean, obviously Roman, Paul Heyman, it's all there to be done.
It's amazing how WWE, like, it was just a couple of years ago, they seemed to be like really down, like as far as like the creative spark, and it's like never been better. I mean, it's they have so many good wrestlers now that are fun to watch. Rhea Ripley and Dominic Mysterio and the Bloodline and Sami Zayn, and they seem like they give really good opportunities to people now, like as
Yeah.
far as push LA Knight.
I think Triple H again is, I think, a huge part of that as well, evidently.
I just think there's not a better person like than him. I mean, look, I don't pretend to know, like, the inner workings of the wrestling business. I'm not there, but just in my brief interactions with him and the background that he has, the pedigree that he has, another ton. I just think, and he seems to have that demeanor too, that he cares about people too.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that was lacking in the old leadership, where, it is a business and everything, but he does seem to have good rapport with people.
No, I remember you. So when I interviewed you like the first time, like, years ago, you mentioned that Hunter was a big part of like helping get that documentary like over the line and getting so much footage and things like that. So it's nice to see that, like, obviously consistent, and what you said there is still kind of showing today with how people are talking about him. And obviously Punk's then had his first promo last week, and he mentioned like, I'm home. And a lot of people kind of gave him a bit of slack for that. But the way he did it, and Punk's a very authentic guy. He's not going to say stuff that he doesn't believe or doesn't want to say. Like, no one's going to make him do that. How did you take that when he said, I'm home? Because he kind of, even in the delivery, said, I was afraid to say it because I was afraid how true it is. And I generally believe that he meant that.
I just feel like when it comes to him, everyone is playing checkers and he's playing chess, because these things just seem to keep working out for him. I mean, he's back in WWE when they're at their peak, and he may know something that we don't. I think you got to let these things play out for a while and see. Somebody who I always thought was really great, and it's kind of, to me, almost has gone unappreciated the last couple of years, is Chris Jericho. But do you remember Chris Jericho came back to WWE after being gone for a long time, a while back, and he came out and he wouldn't say anything. He would just come out and smile, and he wouldn't say anything. And it's just like, this guy, it's just like he's a couple steps ahead of everyone else, like in what he's trying to do and what he's doing. And I feel like CM Punk is that way too. I'm sure they have a plan of what they're going to do, and what's, I've been reading online about Stone Cold, and, and, who knows what they're going to do with CM Punk's character. I mean, it's exciting. I'm looking forward to watching it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that's another thing, going back to the internet thing, is people don't let it play out. They jump on it straight away. It's like, he's just his first promo. Like, let's see where it goes.
The instant reactions, I think, are what hurt things, just with Twitter. I've gone off Twitter just because it's like, to me, it's so negative. Like, it is fun interacting with people, but it's like everything is just criticized now to the nth degree. And whether it's a movie or a TV show or music or anything, and the politics, it's just, it can like bring you down. Like I would get off there sometimes being like kind of a bad mood. And the promos are good. I watched the promo when I woke up, and I was like, oh, that was a good thing. And then I looked on, and everyone's trashing it. And I'm like, wait, should I not like it? Because I don't know if it's just human nature and it just comes out on social media sometimes, but it just seems that it's way more negative than positive. But maybe that's just my perception of it.
No, I 100% agree with you. I kind of get on and do my thing, and I just try to get off the app. I try not to just be stuck in it. Going back to the documentary series for a second, looking back, one of the things I did think was some of the moments you capture now in hindsight are so surreal. Like, you got when Ben Askren stunned him during the training.
Oh, right.
And then knowing how big a star Ben Askren became. And even he had that moment where he's telling Duke Rufus about how he's cursed in Cleveland because that's the building he told Vince that he was leaving. And looking back now, I'm like, wow, those moments now are so much bigger. I'm like, then they were at the time.
I need to rewatch it. That's a good point. Ben Askren too wasn't. He was at one point kind of an enemy of the UFC. He had talked trash about them. So just getting him in the show at the time, people were like surprised he was in there. And you know, MMA is such a great sport in that if you're willing to put in the work and you're willing to, you know, take your lumps, people at a gym, people will help you, you know, like, and Ben Askren would work with Punk, and they would get together and like I think they watched a UFC pay-per-view. Like, people really embraced him, you know, coming in and doing you know, putting himself out there, risking things. And you know, I think that's really cool. And I think yeah, Ben Askren was awesome. Now you bring him up. He
He's a hell of a
super,
personality.
what's that?
A hell of a personality.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, most of these guys are really cool. Most, I'm not saying all, but most athletes or celebrities, if you show them respect, you know, if you respect them in their time, you get it back. That's what I found.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's funny you bring up some of those things. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, no, it just speaks to how, like, some of the impact of the documentary, like that, how it's still, I think it's more relevant and more almost like entertaining and like amazing to watch now than it was even then. And just like finally, Rory, now, like, obviously we've looked at it, reflected back, like, is there a big takeaway from that overall experience, that like that journey with Punk and that film, like the series, like now when you look back and think like about the film, about the series, about the experience, like is there a big takeaway that you have on that whole project?
Well, you know, he got ridiculed a lot after his fight because he went in there and pretty much got smashed, you know. And then he had a second fight and that didn't go well either. But it's like, look, I believe that in life you have to take risks. And the whole point of a risk is that it doesn't work out. Normally you hear about these risks and you know, it's always when it works out, like, oh, of course the person tried this, you know. But when it doesn't, they get ridiculed. And one thing, I actually texted him. Let me see if I can find it. Because like I haven't talked to him since before he left AEW. But would reach out to him. I reached out to him when I had a fight.
Yeah.
And I said, I sent him a thing. And he wrote back, "This is so awesome." And I sent him a picture and he wrote, "I love it, man. Congrats." And I wrote, "You inspired me for real. I respect you so much." And he goes, "Oh, stop." And he goes, "It's so cool you did it though, huh?" So, you know,
I was actually, sorry, I was actually gonna, that was a question that actually slipped my mind. I was actually gonna ask you, like, did that, watching him do it, inspire you? Because obviously you did it, I think,
yeah,
too.
well, I admired that he wasn't afraid to fail. You know, that's what makes him successful. If you think about in wrestling, okay, he does not have especially like when he broke in WWE, he didn't have the body type that you normally would think of. You know, he's not, again, not much of an athlete, but he wasn't like a real jack guy or anything. And he still managed to get over. He still figured out a way, you know, and just that his determination. And, you know, I admire it a lot of how determined he was. And he, you know, wasn't afraid to fail. And I admire anyone that, you know, puts himself out there and takes risks and also tries something like that's, you know, Tony Khan. I've never met Tony Khan. And believe me, I have my own criticisms as a wrestling fan of AEW. But the amount of vitriol this guy suddenly gets now is crazy. And it's just like, I don't know. It's like this guy's putting on another wrestling product for you. And there's been some incredible matches since AEW started, like great moments. I mean, AEW has given us MJF, who in my mind is, to me as a fan, probably since The Rock, the next best star. He's so good, so entertaining, you know. I think he's going to be, at some point, he'll be a giant movie star, you know. And it's like, and he's put on 3 TV programs of wrestling. They've had reality shows. They what, 80,000 people. And it's just like, he should, in my mind, there should be some appreciation of that, of how much this guy's, and then he gets criticized for putting his own money out there. Like, is he supposed to take money from like that's even more admirable. He's actually putting his own money into it. I'm not saying that there's not criticism warranted sometimes, like, as a fan, it's like, how many belts do they need in this and how many wrestlers? I mean, there's like 800 wrestlers in this thing, but regardless, I just admire that this is a guy who took a gamble and put himself out there. And I think that what you see on social media maybe is more the vocal minority. I think more people do admire the gusto of like a CM Punk or whoever it is, or Tony Khan, or these people that kind of go for it, in life. And I believe you have to back those people, the content creators, the athletes, the people that try, what's that saying? It's the man in the arena, that Winston Churchill speech, so I always admire the man in the arena.
Yeah. No, and that's perfectly said. And I admire you, Rory. I'm not just saying that because I love what you do, man. And also every time I speak to you, like these insights and the way you think, I really respect it. And you just go for it as well. And you've done some incredible things. So, and I respect that immensely.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. Hopefully Grace Point, my movie, will be out like, next year. That's my version of CM Punk fighting the UFC. Hopefully the movie does better than he did in the UFC, but we'll see. I went for it. So
no, you did, and I think that, like I said, I think like I emailed you. There was a lot of positives there as well, and like considering the budget and everything you had, like you really did some great stuff. So I wish you all the best for that, and I look forward to seeing the reception and everything for that as well, and also future projects like the ESPN thing you mentioned.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. You're a great interviewer. I appreciate you talking to me.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, and I'll let you go, man. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and then hopefully you can talk soon again.
All right, sounds good, man.
Thanks, Rory.